Jai Hind, Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 23rd of September 2020. Now, in this video, we'll be discussing the following topics. Shift in objectives. So, basically, there's a report by Stratform, which is a leading geopolitical intelligence platform from America, and it states that since past 3 years, especially since the Doklam standoff, China has doubled its air bases and defense systems along the LAC. So we'll see what all that is about. Then NIA empowered to probe drug related offenses. So NIA has been given power under the NDPS Act to probe drug related offenses. So we will see what is NIA, why has it been given the powers, and what sort of powers has NIA got. Then labor scheme in Tibet has echoes of Xinjiang. So in this article, I will tell you about a brief of the Tibetan occupation by China. Then I will also tell you why Tibet is important, not only for China, but also for India. Then we will see what sort of a labor scheme or a sort of a concentration camp that China is running in Tibet. And I will also give you a brief about the Xinjiang atrocities that China is doing. Then a new world order. In this, we will be discussing the issue of UNSC reforms. So first, I will give you a brief about the previous articles that we have covered about the UNSC reforms, including the G4 Coffee Club, right? And the IGN. So in this, I will tell you about the 5 principles of reforms in the UNSC. I will also tell you why there is a need for reform in UNSC. And I will also tell you why India should be a member of the expanded UNSC. So we will be covering a lot of things in a very concise manner in this article. Then Lok Sabha passes J&K official languages bill. Nothing much there. Just we'll see what all languages, basically Kashmiri, Dogri and Hindi have been added along with English and Urdu as the official languages of J&K, the UT of J&K by the Lok Sabha, since the J&K of UT does not have a legislature. So this work has been done by Lok Sabha. Then vaccine guidelines. So a draft has been issued by the CDCSO regarding the vaccine, and it says that any vaccine should have at least 50% of efficacy. So we will see what the guidelines say. Then TRAI recommends body to monitor net neutrality regulator. So basically I will tell you what is net neutrality concept, right? Then I will tell you that TRAI has actually asked for a multi-stakeholder body as a regulator to check or ensure net neutrality in India. So we will be covering an important part of your paper 3 syllabus, the concept of net neutrality. Then stubble burning, again a very, very important topic. Now this covers a lot of topics. For example, some concepts from geography, some concepts from environment and ecology. So we'll see what this problem is, what it is all about, how this problem comes to be, what are the factors that lead to this problem. Very, very important. Then Abhyas high range expendable aerial target or the heat. We'll see what the Abhyas heat is all about, and we'll see how it will help India in future. So this is what we'll be covering. Now let's get started. Stubble burning. Now this is an issue that arises every year, and this is peculiar to northwestern India, especially the states of Haryana, Punjab and the UT of Delhi. So we'll see what is stubble burning. We'll see the reasons behind it. We'll also look at the effects of this practice. And in this article, we'll also explore what is EPCA, what is SAFAR, what is INSAT, and we'll also get to learn something about geography, meteorology. So let's see what this article is all about. The Supreme Court appointed Environment Pollution Prevention and Control Authority EPCA raised concerns about early burning of crop residue in Punjab and Haryana. So basically stubble is crop residue, or more particularly the rice chaff. Basically rice is a kharif crop, right? Now it is harvested, but the residue remains on the land. So to clear the residue and to prepare the land for the Rabi season, the farmers, they basically burn the residue. They don't dispose it off scientifically. They basically just burn it, and that burning, along with some meteorological factors, some unique climatic conditions over India, lead to this problem of pollution. And in every winter, you see National Capital Territory or the National Capital Region is engulfed in a blanket of pollution for 3-4 days that are very, very severe. So you would see that the winter air quality index, the SAFAR, is very, very severe for the winter, and the stubble burning is one of the major contributors. Of course, the traffic and the pollution, all that contributes, but stubble burning has its own special role. Now see, rice is a crop which is not suited for Haryana Punjab region. This rice has brought in, yes, it has brought in prosperity to some, but it has also brought ecological disasters to the region. To begin with, the Haryana Punjab region is semi-arid, right? It is not suitable for crops like rice. It can support wheat, and it basically supports coarse grains like ragi, bajra, jowar, etc. Now what happened? Due to Green Revolution, they got access to irrigation facilities and free electricity they have, or they used to have. It is being removed progressively, and they use pumps to basically pump water into the fields. Now what happens? Because of excess artificial water and access to government subsidies for fertilizers and inputs, they have started growing wheat. Now this wheat started depleting the land. So one of the things that has been a downturn or the downside of the so-called Green Revolution has been depletion of land quality or land degeneration and increasing desertification in Punjab, Haryana region. Then secondly, it has also led to drop in the water table. Now at some places in Punjab and Haryana, water table has drooped too low that they are finding fluorides and even very minute concentrates of uranium. That means the water level has gone down too deep, right? The groundwater level. And with all of that, it is also causing problem of air pollution because of this stubble burning. So it is high time that Punjab and Haryana, they should relook at their agricultural practices if these regions have to or they want to continue their dominance or good growth in terms of agricultural productivity. Now let us get back to the article. According to SAFAR, System of Air Quality and Weather Forecasting and Research under the central government estimate, which uses the INSAT 3 and 3D and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration NASA satellite, the fire counts have increased from 0 to 42 in a few days. That means they have started preparing the land, and we've been reading reports in the newspaper that this season there would be more and more crop growing, and there are some green shoots that we are seeing in the agricultural sector. In 2019, about 9.8 million tons of total estimated crop residue of 20 million tons were burnt in Punjab. Similarly, in Haryana, of the total 7 million tons, 1.24 million tons of stubble were burnt. Now, what is Environment Pollution Prevention and Control Authority, or the EPCA? EPCA was constituted under Section 3 of the Environment Protection Act 1986. So, Section 3, Environment Protection Act 1986. For the National Capital Region, in compliance with Supreme Court order dated January 1998. It has the power to take action suo moto. So it can take action suo moto like it has done right now, or on the basis of complaints made by any individual, representative body or organization functioning in the field of environment. It takes all necessary steps for controlling vehicular pollution, ensuring compliance of fuel quality standards, monitoring and coordinating action for traffic planning and management. So it has a huge role. Now what is INSAT? INSAT is basically a constellation of operational communication satellites. So the INSAT system is a constellation of operational communication satellites placed in the geostationary orbit. Established in 1983 with the commissioning of INSAT 1B. The constellation of INSAT system consists of operational satellites, namely INSAT 3A, 3C, 3D and all of these. So INSAT is what? A constellation of operational communication satellites in which orbit? Geostationary orbit. Now what is SAFAR? The System of Air Quality and Weather Forecasting and Research, SAFAR, that is its full form, is a national initiative introduced by the Ministry of Earth Sciences. So which ministry? Ministry of Earth Sciences, to measure the air quality of a metropolitan city by measuring the overall pollution level and the location specific air quality of the city. So this is your homework or work from your side, that you have to find out what is a metropolitan city, right? What are the criteria for marking a metropolitan city in India? See, don't expect spoon feeding for everything. You should also do your own research, because you should never really blindly trust anyone. And when you do your own research work, you get to know additional stuff. The system is indigenously developed by the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, IITM Pune. So where is IITM? Pune. And is operationalized by the Indian Meteorological Department, or the IMD. So who runs this SAFAR system? IMD. Under which ministry? Ministry of Earth Sciences. Now what is stubble burning? It is a traditional practice in Punjab and Haryana to clean off rice chaff to prepare the field for winter sowing. It begins around October and peaks in November, coinciding with the withdrawal of southwest monsoon. I will just explain what this means, right? The pollutants and the particulate matter, or the PM, from the chaff along with other sources of pollution in Delhi makes winter air quality worse in Delhi and proximity. Really, Delhi becomes a gas chamber during this period. Now what are the reasons? Now we have seen the meteorological reason, that there is withdrawal of southwest monsoon. Number one, increase in rice acreage. I have told you, growing of rice in this region is basically a disaster. Subsidies and assured procurement of rice have led to a rise in rice acreage. Delayed sowing of paddy to late June to discourage the groundwater extraction as per the Punjab Preservation of Subsoil Water Act 2009. So again, delayed sowing. So this also leads to this clearing activity being intensified around the period winter starts, and there is withdrawal of southwest monsoon, and all of these factors come together to play a role in creating this problem. This led to a delayed harvesting. Stubble burning coincides perfectly with the withdrawal of southwest monsoon. This time of the southward shift of the subtropical jet stream happens, causing a westward wind pattern in the northern part of India and thus spreading pollutants. Now let me explain what it is trying to say. So see, this is northern India. These are the Himalayas. So basically what happens, that during the winters, there is a planetary wind called the jet stream. It is basically at high altitude and it brings cold air. During summers, it is blowing north of the Himalayas. Now during winters, because of the shift in pressure conditions and shift in ITCZ, these start blowing south of the Himalayas. So they are basically coming from the west. That is why they are calling the jet streams or westerly jet streams. Now see what happens. This is the Punjab Haryana region, right? This is Delhi. So from here, where whatever is burnt, that goes up in the atmosphere, and these winds, they bring it to Delhi. Now what happens in Delhi? Now basically this period is also a period of withdrawal of southwest monsoon. Now the southwest monsoon, it comes like this. So had there been southwest monsoon, it would have dispersed the pollutants that were accumulating over Delhi. So that thing is not there. But these winds are bringing, and see, this all happens simultaneously. When the southwest winds are blowing like this, the westerlies are blowing like this. So not much interaction or interference. But now they start withdrawing from here to here, and these jet streams, they start coming to this region and they bring the pollutants. Now, secondly, what happens? This is an onset of winter, and a thing called temperature inversion starts taking place. Now, temperature inversion, for now you should know that temperature inversion basically means a condition of stability. So along with the pollutants coming to Delhi, Delhi starts experiencing temperature inversion from this period onwards, and that leads to conditions of stability in Delhi. So this wind does not move forward and the pollutants get accumulated over Delhi, and that leads to the problem of this gas chamber that Delhi becomes during this time period. So it is a complex mixture of economic, right, meteorological and human practices that leads to this problem. Now getting back to the article. Technology, increased and modernized farm mechanization extract the rice grains only and leave large quantities of rice stubble behind. Earlier, this excess crop was used by farmers for cooking, as hay to keep in their animal warm, or even as extra insulation for home. So technology is again playing a bad role here, not a good role. High silica content. Rice straw is considered useless as fodder in the case of non-basmati rice because of its high silica content. So they don't have any use of it because in non-basmati rice category, the rice husk has high silica content, and since it is useless, it is burnt. Now, what are the effects of stubble burning? Stubble burning emits large amounts of toxic pollutants into the atmosphere, which contain harmful gases like methane, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compound VOC, and carcinogenic polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So all the dangerous things are contained in this stubble burning emission. So this is also important for your PT. What all is there? Methane, carbon monoxide, VOC, and carcinogenic polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Again, this point is important that because of high silica content in the rice straw of non-basmati variety, it is useless as a fodder, right? And these meteorological systems also have a role to play in creating this condition. The burning of wheat straw reduces the soil fertility besides polluting the environment. Additionally, the heat generated by stubble burning penetrates into the soil, leading to loss of moisture and useful microbes. Again, very, very important points for your PT and mains. And see, such a simple thing, but so many devastations. So this is a complex mixture of factors. Number one, meteorological. As we saw that there is withdrawal of southwest monsoon, right? And the westerly jet streams, they start blowing south of Himalayas, right? This is one of the reasons. This is the meteorological reason. And the temperature inversion that takes place in the NCR region during this period, right? Then there is the policy reason. What is the policy? That Punjab policy says that you have to sow your Rabi crop late, right? And because of that period, they burn it later on. That occurs or coincides with this meteorological event. So policy is also there. Then there are economics of the whole thing. Because the waste or the stubble is no longer useful, the farmers have moved to mechanization, and mechanization removes all the stubble. It basically gets the rice, and this part is rendered useless, and more so in the case of non-basmati rice, which is high in silica content. So it is not an easy thing, it is a complex thing, but a solution is required, and it needs a coordination between the center government and the government of Punjab, Haryana, and the UT of Delhi. Probably that is the reason why the Supreme Court has to step in and make a body called EPCA. So this is all about this article. Labor scheme in Tibet has echoes of Xinjiang. Now before we move ahead in this article, first let us get an idea about the history of the Tibetan struggle, and I will also tell you why China is so much possessive, or why China wants to keep Tibet under control. See, one of the obvious ones is that Tibet is a buffer between India and China. Again, the 5-finger strategy of Mao. But there are other reasons as well as to why they want to subjugate Tibet. So let us first get into the history of Tibet and the subjugation, why China is after Tibet. Now, brief history of the atrocity in Tibet. Tibet is a country in the Himalayan mountains. See, this is Tibet, this is Nepal, Bhutan, India, and China. And Tibet is very, very important for India as well. Not only security reasons, but even our monsoon depends on Tibet. So any change or massive change with the topography of Tibet would harm India, and also major river systems in India like Indus and Brahmaputra, both of them emerge from Tibet. So again, Tibet is very, very important for India. Any sabotage to the paths of these rivers or anything could seriously impact India. So we also are very much concerned about Tibet. By landmass, it should be the world's 10th largest nation. Now in 1950, China invaded its neighbor and seized control by force. Tibetans have lived under China's military rule ever since. So this is the de facto modus operandi of the Chinese, that they always use force, and now they have started using propaganda. Now, Tibetans attempted to take back their country in an enormous uprising in March 1959. The protests were crushed with brutal force because that is what the Chinese know. Just search the Tiananmen Square and you will know how the Chinese people are with their own people. So these are Tibetans whom they don't even consider as their own. So you just imagine what they would be doing with them. Now it was in this backdrop that, fearing for his safety, that Tibetan's young leader, the Dalai Lama, was forced to flee across the mountains to India, where he still lives today. And this is one of the thorny point in the India-Chinese relations, because we give protection to Dalai Lama and China says that you return Dalai Lama to us, but we will never do that. Then after the Chinese control, China basically divided Tibet. Tibet was divided up and incorporated into Chinese provinces. The largest of these is the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region, or TAR. Now, despite its name, the TAR is anything but autonomous. China rules with an iron fist and Tibet is ranked amongst the worst of the worst for human rights violations. Seriously, the conditions in Tibet are very, very bad. In fact, what they are doing in Xinjiang, it all started with Tibet, but they have crossed all limits in Xinjiang. China continues to insist that Tibetans are happy and prosperous but won't allow journalists, tourists, or diplomats to see for themselves. In fact, it is easier for a Tibetan person to get into heaven than to get a passport. They are not even allowed to travel outside China, and recently Tibet has also signed a extradition treaty with Nepal that came into force in January 2020. So basically all the Tibetan refugees that might be running to Nepal, now they would be sent back to China. And we know that under Mr. KP Oli, Nepal is basically a vassal state of China. Tibetans have never stopped resisting the destruction of their culture and way of life. Their protests continue to be guided by their Buddhist faith and the non-violent principles. You can take a screenshot. So these are the repressions that the Chinese are unleashing on the Tibetans. Now the question arises, why? Let us see. Do you know that Tibet is called the water table of Asia? If you remember, 2 videos back we discussed the Hind Kush Himalayan region, and I told you that 10 major rivers of this region originate from the Hind Kush Himalayan region. Basically I was talking about Tibet only. 10 major rivers of the region originate from Tibet, including 2 important ones for India, the Indus system and the Brahmaputra system. They both originate from near the Kailash Mansarovar lake. Now let us see why China is after Tibet. China calls Tibet the Western Treasure House. Since invading in 1950, it has used Tibet's resources to fuel its economic and industrial expansion. Basically, Tibet is a plateau, and plateaus are intrinsically rich in many natural resources. Now, the beliefs of the Tibetans do not allow them to basically exploit the land for resources, and that was again one of the reason why China has been so repressive on the Tibetans, because China wants to exploit the resources, but there was some sort of resistance by the Tibetan people. So best way was to suppress them and exploit their resources. So basically China is an colonist exploiter of Tibet. China has moved more than 2 million Tibetan nomads off their land to open it up for exploitation. So basically what East India Company did in India, they basically converted forests as areas that were out of bound for Indians, and the British could go into those forests and exploit those forests. So that is what the Chinese have been doing in the Tibetan region. Tibet is rich in silver, lead, zinc, lithium and other raw materials used in consumer products. Very important. And if you see, China has basically fueled its growth on the back of these products only, and the raw material come from where? Tibet. Why? Because Tibet is a shield region, a plateau. I will tell you later on when we discuss geography what is a shield region, what is a plateau. But plateaus are intrinsically rich in natural resources. So Tibet is also rich in these resources, and if you see, Tibet really is the source of Chinese wealth. That is why in Chinese folklore and history, Tibet has been called a Western treasure house. So one more reason why China would not let Tibet go. China's growing transport infrastructure in Tibet takes natural resources out and moves military forces in and China workers in. Again, like the British built the railways in India to exploit the resources of India and to basically transport the resources up to ports from where they could be exported. Similarly, China has built transport infrastructure in the Tibetan region to basically exploit the resources of Tibetan region. Tibet's huge uranium deposits, again uranium, zinc, copper, lead, these are the metals or the elements or the resources that you basically get in a shield region or a plateau region, and Tibet being the highest plateau in the world is rich of these all resources. So Tibet's huge uranium deposits feed China's expanding nuclear power program. Tibet's rivers supply water to half the world's population. Like I told you that Tibet region is home to 10 rivers. Basically 10 major rivers originate from the Tibet area. Two important ones for India being Indus and Brahmaputra. Both of them originate from the Tibet near the Mansarovar lake region. China is diverting and damming them for hydropower. Tibetans' defense of their land is met with torture, imprisonment, tear gas and bullets. So these Chinese are the worst people, and they are doing the worst kind of things to Uyghurs Muslim in the Xinjiang region. We will be making a separate video about that because it is a very large and complex issue. It involves a lot of parties, and the kind of things that the Chinese are doing there are really shameful, and it deserves a different video or a separate video of its own. So we will make it. Now let us get back to the article. So this report is by Jamestown Foundation, American Foundation. China is forcing Tibetan farmers and herders into labor programs similar to those used in troubled Xinjiang. So what they have done in Xinjiang, they don't let the Uyghur Muslims practice Islam. They don't let them talk about religion. All the women, they are being sterilized. The young men are being interned into camps where they are being forcefully giving communist education, military education. They are indoctrinating them into the communist lifestyle. Similarly, what they are doing in Tibet, they are basically trying to erode the ethnicity of the Tibetan people. They are offering sops to Tibetans to go for marriage with the Han Chinese. And China is luring people, the Tibetans, in form of certain sops to the children of these mixed marriages. They would get employment guarantee, entry into the Communist Party, because China wants to erase the ethnicity of the Tibetan people, because China knows that it is the ethnicity of these people that gives them the strength to challenge China again and again. See, they captured the area in 1950. It is now 2020. 70 years and they are fighting and not giving up. The moves risk loss of cultural heritage in the politically sensitive region. The training schemes aim to instill work discipline, Chinese language and work ethics into the Tibetan people. We have already seen the history and the importance of Tibet. Now, this militarized vocational training is also a form of ideological indoctrination and assimilation towards ethnic Tibetans, who make up 90% of the remote border region's population. The report claims there are similarities with the labor schemes in the troubled Xinjiang region. So basically, the images accessed by satellite show that these so-called vocational training centers have walls as high as 3 meters. So why would you need a 3-meter barbed wired wall at a vocational training center? Because it is an internment center, not a vocational training center. In Xinjiang, China is carrying out massive repression on the Uyghur Muslims. The scale of the Tibetan work schemes is still dwarfed by that of the Xinjiang, which trained an average of 1.2 million workers each year between 2014 and 19. And these Chinese are the worst. Basically what they did recently in the Xinjiang region, they demolished a mosque and on that same spot they built a public toilet. This is just one of the ways of humiliating these people. So let us hope that the world evokes its consciousness and fights the Chinese and gets these Uyghurs and the Tibetans their freedom and dignity. TRAI recommends body to monitor net neutrality. Now TRAI or the TRAI is the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. It is basically the regulator of the telecom sector in India. Now, before we understand what sort of a body it is talking about, it is basically recommending a multi-stakeholder body. So before we get into that, first let us understand what is net neutrality. Now, net neutrality is a very basic concept. It says that when you are trying to access internet, the service provider, which is the ISP, should not favor one platform over other, right? And you should get similar speeds in all the platforms, whatever you're trying to access. And you should not be asked for premium price for basically accessing particular sites, right? Your access to that particular site should be free. Then it is up to the site what kind of a revenue model they are using, but that should not be charged by the internet service provider. That, for example, you must be paying for any OTT, Netflix or any OTT. So it should not be the case that your internet service provider is asking for 200 rupees per month to just to allow you access to Netflix or any OTT, and then you're again paying for the subscription of Netflix, right? So this is the principle of net neutrality. Now it all started with when Facebook tried to introduce in India Facebook Zero. And then there was also Airtel Zero, and Jio also had its plan. So basically what all they were trying to do is that Facebook's idea was that they would give you free internet, right? Absolutely free internet. But the condition was that only particular players would be allowed on that network. So Facebook would not be charging you anything, but all those players who would be on that platform would be paying Facebook. So in that process, what would happen? Because Facebook has such a large presence and it has deep pockets, it could basically dominate the whole market, and it would then kick out all the small platforms. And that would mean the end of the free internet, which is not at all acceptable, because internet today is one of the only free spaces, so-called free spaces that we have. So we would want to maintain a neutrality in terms of internet. So let us first see what is net neutrality. I've given you the 3 principles. You can please take a screenshot because it will help you later on in understanding. So net neutrality is the idea that internet service providers should treat all content flowing through their cables and cell towers equally. It should not be the case that you are using Airtel connection and then Airtel is promoting Amazon Prime, so you get Amazon Prime but not Netflix. And when you're using Vodafone network, then they are promoting Netflix and not Amazon Prime. So what would happen? That the speed of Netflix on that network would be faster than your current Airtel network. Then what is happening? That they are basically promoting one side over the other, which is not at all acceptable. This means that they shouldn't be able to slide some data into fast lanes while blocking or otherwise discriminating against other material, because the implications could be massive. There could also be implications on your free right of expression and freedom of speech, because these service providers could be blocking your content and they could be asking money from you just to publish your blogs. Imagine what a situation that would be. So what is net neutrality? This is a simple diagram. All traffic on the internet should be treated equally. There should be no blocking, no throttling, and no paid prioritization. Blocking means that every site should be accessible. Throttling means that it should not be the case that some site is getting loaded fast and other are slow. And paid prioritization, that some companies pay the service provider that their site should come up first or their platforms are running faster. So no blocking. Your internet access provider cannot block you from accessing legal content of your choice. See, so here your choice is important. Then no throttling. Your internet access provider cannot intentionally throttle legal internet traffic to slower speeds than other traffic, right? I just told you. And no paid prioritization. Your internet access provider cannot sell fast lane service to content providers who can pay more than others. Now imagine there's a competition between Amazon Prime and Netflix. Now Prime has much deeper pockets than Netflix. So if that were to be the case, then Prime could basically destroy Netflix, because they could afford paying that much amount of money to the service provider that whenever you try to access Netflix on your service provider network, it would be slow, and Amazon Prime would be instantaneous and fast. So eventually you would shift to Amazon and you would leave Netflix, and that would destroy that company. So that should not be the case. Forget about the companies, it is playing with your choice. It should be your choice whether you want Amazon Prime or Netflix or both or neither. It should be your choice. So net neutrality is about your choice, right? Now what are the TRAI recommendations? The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India has recommended the creation of, I told you, a multi-stakeholder body to ensure that internet access providers adhere to the provisions of net neutrality. The MSB should be set up as a non-profit entity. Then only we can ensure that it would remain non-partisan and it would be a neutral party. Roles and responsibilities. So what would be the roles and responsibility of this multi-stakeholder body? To provide advice and support to Department of Telecommunications (DOT) in monitoring and enforcement of net neutrality principles. To investigate complaints regarding the violation of net neutrality. To help Department of Telecommunications in maintenance of a repository of reasonable traffic management practices. So this is also important to manage traffic, else it would lead to, if the traffic is not managed properly, it could lead to the crash of the network. So traffic management is also important. It is also important to check what sort of a data, what sort of a legal data is there, because illegal data has to be removed. Now, who all would be the stakeholders? It could include telecom service providers, internet service providers, content providers, researchers, academic and technical community, civil society organization, and the government. So again, that is why it is being called a multi-stakeholder body. All these stakeholders are being made part of this body. Now, net neutrality in India. So we basically follow some principles which were TRAI's recommendation, which have been accepted by DOT. It bars telcos from discriminatory treatment on the web based on content, sender, receiver, protocols, or equipment. So for any of these cases, they cannot use discriminatory treatment, which we have already discussed. 3 principles. Number 1, no blocking. Number 2, no throttling. And number 3, no paid prioritization. These are the 3 basic pillars of net neutrality, right? So telcos cannot give discriminatory treatment. It penalizes for violation of license rules on net neutrality. Includes exceptions for critical services such as remote healthcare diagnostics, self-driving cars, etc. So basically this telemedicine field is coming up in a big way, especially in the times of corona pandemic. People can't go to the doctor or are hesitant in visiting a clinic. So they are going for telemedicines, they are basic apps and all. So these services could be, and again self-driving cars, they would need access to data, GPS and all that. So such services could be given a priority in terms of speed and access. Exempts content delivery networks which do not use public internet from open web rules. It applies equally to 5G technology as well, because the principles are technology neutral. So the principles of net neutrality in India are also technology neutral. So important points again, 3 principles of net neutrality: no blocking, no throttling, and no paid prioritization. Then as per the recommendation of TRAI to the Department of Telecom, they have said that you make a multi-stakeholder body involving multi-stakeholders like the content provider, the ISPs, academicians, civil society, etc. to make a MSB which would be regulating the net neutrality principles, and if there are any violations, it would report to DOT. It would also help DOT in the network traffic management. And then we saw the principles of net neutrality in India. So this is all about this article. So you have covered your paper 3 part as well in this article. A new world order, reforms in UN. So I have told you that this is the 75th year of UN. So we will be getting many articles about the UN and different organs of UN in the newspapers these days. And UN is important for this year and the next year examination, right? Now this article is about reforms in UN, particularly the reforms in the Security Council. Now basically the structure of Security Council is that it has 15 members. 5 are permanent and 10 are non-permanent members who are elected from specific regions for a period of 2 years, right? Now the 5 permanent members are US, UK, Russia, France and China. Now basically these 4 were considered among the victors of World War II and China was added later on. Now basically when UN came up and when UNSC emerged, it was in the backdrop of the Second World War. That after the Second World War, this organization was formed. Now today UN or the UNSC does not reflect the realities, the geopolitical and the economic realities of the world. So there have been calls about reforms in the UN. And especially in the current scenario, the UN and especially WHO has failed tremendously in addressing the coronavirus impact. So there have been calls, and like I've been telling you, we'll soon be making a video to expose UN, how it is being dominated by vested interests, basically by China. And you would be surprised to know that the anti-terror organs of UN are being headed by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Again, shocking. We'll address all these issues later on. Let us now see what we have already discussed about Security Council reforms in previous videos. I told you about the concept of intergovernmental negotiation framework that was started in 2002, and in 2015 it also gave a document, but nothing much has happened on that. So today we will know the 5 key areas that were highlighted by the IGN framework document. Then I told you about G4 countries, India, Japan, Brazil and Germany, that are basically asking for reforms in the Security Council. They are saying that expand the Security Council and give us the veto powers. And these powers, the existing members, especially Russia, US and China, they are not ready for expansion. And even if there has to be an expansion, they don't want to part with their veto power. So that is creating a problem. Now apart from this, there is a group called Coffee Club. I told you about this as well in previous videos, which has members like Pakistan and Italy. Basically it has 40 members or countries as members. Now they are opposing the reform agenda of G4 countries. So that is also stalling the reforms in the UN, especially the UNSC. And India has again been elected as non-permanent member of the UNSC, and its term will start from 1st January 2021. So for 2 years, 2021 and 2022, India will be on board of UNSC, right? Now let us see what this article is saying. India has been at the forefront of demanding reform in the UN, particularly its principal organ, the Security Council, for decades. Now first, let us see what are the basis for India's claims. India is one of the world's largest economies and most populous countries. It is true, and yet it is not on the permanent members seat. Track record in promoting a rule-based international order and contributing to peacekeeping through UN forces. In fact, India is one of the largest contributors to UN peacekeeping forces. So we deserve a seat. Now, what are the need for reforms? For example, the UNSC does not have permanent member from the African continent, not from South American continent, neither from the Australian region, that is the countries like Australia and New Zealand, right? So they must also be given a representation. These are also large populations and also economic centers and geostrategic powers. So they should also get a seat, but they are not getting that representation. So let us see what are the need for reforms. And I've already told you that these organizations of the UN, especially the UNSC and the WHO, have failed in giving a befitting response to the corona pandemic. And UNSC has also been responsible for many disputes rather than solutions of those disputes. We saw in that article, or International Day of Peace, how the permanent members of UNSC have misused their veto powers to give rise to disputes and serve their own geopolitical interests rather than the interests of humanity. So let us see need for reforms. The UN was born in the crisis of the World War era after World War II, and the realities of that time can hardly be compared to the present. The UNSC's permanent veto-carrying members, chosen by virtue of being winners of World War II, the US, the UK, France and Russia, and later China was also added, can hardly claim adequate representation of the world's leadership today. So first point is, there is not adequate representation of world's leadership. The UNSC does not include a permanent member from the African, Australian and South American continents. There is a deep polarization within the UN membership. Frequent divisions within the UNSC P5 end up blocking key decisions, because whenever a key decision has to be taken, it is blocked by some member or the other. For example, on key issues like global terror, China always comes to the rescue of its blood and iron brother, whatever they call Pakistan. Basically, Pakistan is a proxy and it is going to be a vassal state of China real soon because Pakistan is being bought out by China. Anyways, the UN, UNSC and WHO have failed to play an effective role in helping nations deal with COVID-19. Again, WHO major financing is from China, especially after the US has withdrawn from WHO. Now, what are the key issues for reform in UNSC? There are 5 major issues which were highlighted by the IGN headed by G4 countries. Again, intergovernmental negotiations framework, right? So these are the 5 major issues for reform in UNSC. Enlarging the Security Council, then increasing the categories of memberships, then the question of veto that 5 permanent members of the UNSC wield. So they are basically saying either you remove veto power altogether or you give veto to everyone. All the new members that would be added to the permanent membership of the UNSC. Then there should be regional representation, at least one from each continent, and redistribution of the Security Council General Assembly power balance, because the Security Council is all powerful. All the decisions taken by General Assembly, especially major decisions, are to be ratified by the Security Council, and there the politics within the Security Council come into play and the misuse of veto is highlighted again. So there has to be a balance between the two. So these are the key issues for reforms within the UNSC, and I've also given you the backdrop of the previous articles that we have covered in previous videos. Shift in China's objectives. So there has been a report by Stratfor, which is an American geopolitical intelligence platform. And the report basically says that after the Doklam incident or the standoff of 2017, China has basically built up or ramped up its infrastructure along the LAC, and it has increased its bases by almost twice. So let us see what this report is saying. Basically, you must understand that the 2017 standoff at Doklam, that was the real turning point in the India-China LAC dispute, or the India-China foreign relations, you might say, because it was at Doklam that India proved beyond doubt, number one, that India would not be accepting any Chinese bullying, and number two, that India was a formidable opponent. China had underestimated India all along. So that really rattled the Chinese, and as a result of that, they have been ramping up their infrastructure. As you can see, this is the western part of LAC, and here they have had these air bases, helicopter bases, and then air defense sites. And you see, post Ladakh crisis, they are also building new structures. All the blue ones are the new structures post Ladakh. So they are basically ramping their presence. And I've been telling you that we can expect some disturbance at the eastern end of the LAC and see how much of development they have done there. So in the western sector, China has and is going to lose its nose. So it will try to press us on the western sector. And even in the middle sector, China will try to poke us, and especially it will be using Nepal as a proxy to push India. Now let us see what this article is saying. A new strategic report by Stratfor has said that China has doubled air bases and defensive positions near the Indian border in 3 years. That is since 2017 Doklam. Doklam effect. Since the Doklam crisis, China has started constructing at least 13 entirely new military positions near its borders with India, including 3 air bases, 5 permanent air defense positions, and helicopter bases, 5 helicopter bases. Now, what are the implications? Before we get into that, let me just show you the graph. So you can even take a screenshot of this. So this is basically showing that how the status quo is changing. The green is again for the air defense, red for air base, and EW site and helicopter. So you see, till 2017, nothing. And then they started building up, especially see in 2019, and this is 2020, and the blue one are basically the helicopters. And see, post Ladakh incident, they have really increased their bases here. Now see this 2019 build up, so it is basically indicating that China had planned this thing that is happening in 2020, it is not an accident. Let us just read what is it saying. China has subsequently expanded and upgraded its military infrastructure along the Indian border side since the 2017 Doklam crisis. This activity has increased sharply over the past 2 years in particular, leading to the deadly June 15 clash between Indian and Chinese forces in the disputed Ladakh region. So you see, so now Stratfor is saying that basically China had planned all of this, what is happening in 2020, in 2019 itself, and the developments are basically pointing to that only. Now, what are the implications? So basically what China is trying to do, its policy in the South China Sea, it is trying to replicate along the LAC with India. Now, what is the South China Sea dispute and everything? I have made a video. It is a good video to explain everything that has been happening in the South China Sea dispute. I will surely put a link to that. So please make it a point and watch that video. So the implications, once finished, this infrastructure will provide support for an even greater intensity of Chinese operations. The timing of the Chinese buildup of military facilities along the border with India just prior to the ongoing Ladakh standoff suggests these border tensions are part of a much larger effort by China to assert control over its border regions. And we also discussed the 5-point or the 5-finger strategy of Mao Zedong. Basically, all the border regions of China, including the South China Sea, they want to increase their influence there to use that area as a buffer to defend China. Now, I don't know against whom they are building up their defenses. They have basically gone crazy. Parallels with South China Sea strategy. This approach is similar to China's strategy in the South China Sea, where a buildup of permanent defense facilities supports Chinese localized military superiority. In fact, in South China Sea, China basically employs a cabbage strategy. Now, what it is very interesting thing. Please go and watch that video. And significantly raises the potential cost of military opposition to Beijing's maritime claims in the region by applying the same strategy along its land frontier with India. China aims to discourage Indian resistance or military action during future border disputes by ostentatiously demonstrating its ability and intent to engage in military confrontation. So again, this is a method of bullying, but India will stand up to the bully, and I am again telling you, come winter, we'll see what happens to China. NIA empowered to probe drug-related offenses. So here we will see what is NIA, right? And we'll also see that why drug-related offenses are being given to NIA. Basically, there's a word called narco-terrorism. That means that drugs and terrorism have very close links. Even the Naxalites and drugs have very close links. Now you might wonder why or how. See what happens, these terror organizations, they need money, right? So to get money, they basically get into the business of drugs. Now drugs serve two purposes. Number one, revenue, and number two, weakening the enemy. That is what they were trying to do in Punjab, that ISI is basically pumping in drugs to basically make the youth of Punjab useless. And if you see statistically, a large number of youth from Punjab goes into the Indian army. So they are basically trying to corrupt the next generation from going into the Indian army, or even those that manage to get in to be of not that high quality. But I can assure you that Indian army has very high standards. So that is a different proposition, but they are basically playing with our youth. And it is not just in India, it is everywhere. So this drugs and terrorists have close link, and the same goes for the Naxalites. They also need money. So they grow weed in the area where they are dominating. Now, some people say that weed is natural, it is normal, sadhus take it, why not we take it, this and that. You have to understand the natural weed and the commercial weed that you consume is way, way different. The amount of psychotropics or the thing that gives you kick is much, much lesser in the natural weed than the commercially grown weed. They have actually made the whole process of growing weed so sophisticated that the stuff that you get is really, really dangerous. So you might have some preferences, But please remember, when you're doing something like that, you are actually playing with the national security. You are helping the enemies of a country by paying them by buying drugs. So do not do anything that is not legal, at least in this manner. I mean, there are some gray areas that laws are outdated and whatnot, but this is actually a danger. So NIA is a central agency and it is entrusted with the task of securing the national security, checking the counterfeit currency, and important tasks we'll just see. So they have added one more dimension, that is the narco terror angle to NIA. So what really happens now? For example, NIA is busting any terror module and it has connections with narco cells. So NIA does not need the permission of local police officers or their concurrence. They can just go ahead and make their operations successful or whatever, howsoever they want to carry their operations. So let us just see what this article is saying. To investigate offences under the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances NDPS Act, this is in news these days, the agency need not rely on local police to unravel drug trade ties that emerge during counter-terrorism operations. NIA officers of inspector rank and above have been vested with the same powers as an officer in charge of a police station under the 1985 NDPS law. So officers of inspector rank and above, they have the same power as an SHO, right, under the 1985 NDPS law. Now what is the NIA? It is the premier central agency constituted under National Investigation Act of 2008. It is a central agency to investigate and prosecute offences relating to affecting the sovereignty, security, integrity of India, security of state, friendly relations with foreign states. So very, very important agency. And against atomic and nuclear facilities, if someone is trying to carry any espionage activity or trying to destroy these or sabotage these facilities, then again NIA comes in. And smuggling of high quality counterfeit Indian currency. Now you see, all of these things are connected. Terror, counterfeit currency, drugs, then their target could be basically atomic or nuclear facility or sovereignty, security, integrity, friendly relations. So what they have done is they have integrated all the things. Probably in future we'll see more powers being given to the NIA. So a good initiative. Lok Sabha passes J&K official languages bill. So as of now, J&K is a UT without a legislature. It will get a legislature soon after the delimitation practice is done and the constituencies are demarcated. Then elections would be conducted for the UT of J&K. And Ladakh is a UT without a legislature. Now this official languages bill has been passed by Lok Sabha. Let us see what it does. The Lok Sabha passed the J&K Official Languages Bill 2020 that seeks to include Kashmiri, Dogri and Hindi. So Kashmiri, Dogri and Hindi have been incorporated as the official languages of J&K as the official languages in the newly created Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Earlier, only English and Urdu were the official languages in the former state. So now, along with English and Urdu, you also have Kashmiri, Dogri and Hindi as the official languages of the UT of J&K. A vaccine must have at least 50% efficacy. These are the draft guidelines for COVID vaccine. These draft guidelines have been released by CDCSO, which is the apex level body in India related to all the vaccine developments, right? So it says that it must have at least a 50% efficacy. Efficacy means that the vaccine does what it intends to do, right? Now basically the target should be 100%, but in case of respiratory diseases, the vaccines have a lower efficacy rate. So they have set a benchmark of 50% for any vaccine in India. So let us quickly look at it. A potential COVID-19 vaccine ought to confer at least 50% protection and be able to either prevent infection or disease, but not necessarily both. So it should either prevent the infection or it should prevent the disease. So that means even if you get infected with the virus, at least you should not get the disease. So if it does both, well and good, but at least it should do one of these things. and at least it should have an efficacy of 50%. Draft guidelines issued by the Central Drugs and Standards Control Organization, the apex regulator of drug and vaccine trials, and an officer under this, the DCGI, which is basically controlling all the drug trials, and we have discussed that in detail in a previous video where we discussed all the stages of clinical trial, and we have also discussed the whole regulatory mechanisms of conducting clinical trials and the vaccinations in India. So you can go back to that video and refer to relevant sections. Now these guidelines are similar to standards set by World Health Organization, very dubious organization these days, as well as peer international regulatory organizations such as the United States Food and Drug Administration, US FDA. The WHO says for a vaccine that safety, immunogenicity and efficacy are 3 criteria. So what are the 3 criteria? Safety, immunogenicity and efficacy. Aiming for 100% efficacy should be the ideal thing, but that's unlikely being a respiratory infection. So the target is 50% and above. So target of efficacy is 50% and above. It should either control the infection or the disease, and if it does both, very good, but at least it should do one of those things, right? And what are the 3 criteria for a vaccine as per WHO? Safety, immunogenicity and efficacy, right? So this is all about it. Abhay high speed expendable aerial target. So as the name suggests, it is an aerial target which is expendable. Basically this is a target which would help us test the efficiency of our supersonic or hypersonic missiles or the missiles that we are developing. So again, Abhay high speed expendable air target. So let us see. DRDO conducted successful flight tests of the indigenously designed Abhay high speed expendable aerial target or HEAT in Balasore, Odisha. 2 demonstrator vehicles of Abhay's cleared all the evaluation parameters like 5 km altitude flying, vehicle speed of 0.5 Mach, half the speed of sound. In a previous video, I have explained the whole concept of Mach speed. Then we were also discussing hypersonic speeds. Hypersonic speeds are basically above 5 Mach, and we basically tested a high hypersonic demonstration technology vehicle. That was a big thing, and it has put India into an elite club of having hypersonic missiles, right? So to test such missiles, we need some targets. So this Abhay would help in solving that problem. Endurance of 30 minutes, etc. This is designed and developed by Aeronautics Development Establishment, ADE of DRDO. ADE was also associated with the development of the HSDTV. Now the features. It is a drone UAV that will be used as a target for various missile systems. It is powered by a small gas turbine engine. Navigation by micro electromechanical MEMS system based inertial navigation system for the navigation. Now this MEMS system has also been developed indigenously. MEMS is a process technology used to create tiny integrated devices or systems that combine mechanical and electronic components. So basically it is a sort of an Indian jugaad where we connect mechanical and electronic components and we make an integrated device. Now what are the advantages? It is lightweight and reliable, consumes less power and is cost effective because it is a mixture of mechanical and electronic components. Uses as a target for evaluation of various missile systems. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and please press the bell icon so that you don't get to miss out on any new videos that we post. Also, if you like this video, please press the like button and please do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. See you next time. Till then, stay safe, stay happy and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.